Hey, Dr. C here. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what sort of new technology should you consider having at home. In other words, home monitoring systems. Just like you have for your security in the home and all, we're getting all these, quote, smart things now. We have loads of technology available in medicine as well. Some of them are not totally necessary, but some of them are very interesting and very accurate and very good to have. So that's what we're going to talk about. And we're going to focus on our vital signs. Now you remember the vital signs. They're just measurements that the doctor takes, measurements that indicate the status of your vital functions. And what are these measurements that are taken? Well, number one, your weight, your height, your blood pressure, your pulse. Nowadays, they also take your oxygen saturation. So all those things are important. So let's talk a little bit about each one of them and what are the new instrumentations that are available on the market. Good. First of all, let's talk about the general one that's out there that we should probably consider, and that is for blood pressure. First of all, what is blood pressure? Well, basically the pressure inside the artery, it's the force. It's the force that's generated by the beating heart and then the relaxing of the heart. The beating heart, when it pushes that blood out, the arteries that then contain that blood expand and contract, expand and contract. That's because the arteries are a little thicker, they have muscle in the wall, and they're able to expand and contract, depending on the beat of the heart. So it's that force against the wall that you're measuring. That's the blood pressure. Okay? Many years ago, I believe it was way back in the early 1980s, 1828. That's when they first used a mercury manometer. We used a lot of mercury back in those days. We used it for the manometer for blood pressure. We used it for the thermometers as well, as you recall. And the thermometer depended upon expansion. Temperature expanded the mercury, and so they could take your temperature in that manner. Eventually, they switched over though to colored alcohol, because of the worry about mercury. Hell, I remember playing with the damn mercury. It was fun, beating it around. It was a heavy little ball of stuff, But I guess we can't use it nowadays, so it goes over to recycle. So getting away from it. Though the old mercury manometer was introduced, like I said, way back then, but at first it didn't have a cuff. Let's talk a little bit about a cuff. Now, what are the components of the blood pressure cuff? Well, first of all, this cuff has a rubber bladder within it, and that rubber bladder is only about this long, so it's not all of the cuff. Only comes from here to there. That's it. That's the size of the cuff. All of the cuffs are exactly the same. They don't fill all of the outside covering. That's number one. So that rubber cuff is inside. You don't see it. So the cuff really came into being back in 1896. That's when they developed this cuff. Then in 1905, they developed the sounds. And you needed a stethoscope to hear the sounds. So this is what the doctor or the nurse will use, if they do it in the standard original way. Now this dates way back now, way back to 1905. You should use the bell of the stethoscope. Of course, the nurse's stethoscope doesn't have a bell, just has the diaphragm, but you can still hear it with the diaphragm well. So what they did then is develop this method of taking blood pressures. Now, what are the important things about taking a blood pressure? Well, number one, you place it on the upper arm. Why the upper arm? You want to be as close to the heart as possible. Does it make any difference which arm you take it in? Not really. Each arm should be within 10 millimeters of mercury difference between the two arms. Should be less than 10 millimeters systolic difference. Usually is. But at any rate, you take it on the upper arm. The cuff itself should not have any material between the cuff and your skin. Why not? Why? Because if you take it with material between the cuff and the skin, you're going to get an abnormal reading. Whoa. How much difference? Well, basically, it could be anywhere between up to 10 millimeters or 15 millimeters of mercury systolic lower because of the material, the amount of material. So don't ever take a blood pressure over. I don't care how much, but don't take it over material. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, you take it sitting. Why? Well, if you take it standing, you're going to get an abnormal reading. Why? Why? Because when you take it standing, you have to your heart has to generate more force to get the blood up to the brain. The blood pressure is going to be increased. Sometimes up to 10 millimeters of mercury systolic difference. Don't take it lying down. Lying down, just the opposite. It's going to be a lot lower, especially the diastolic reading. So, you take it sitting. Both feet flat on the floor. Well, what if you take it and the feet, you're short, and the feet are just dangling there? They're not flat on the floor. You're going to get an abnormal reading. Unsupported feet can increase the blood pressure roughly about 5 or so millimeters of mercury systolic higher. Well, what else? Well, has any nurse that's ever taken your blood pressure in the office ever asked you if you had a smoke before you came in, or if you had a drink before you came in? Well, no. Nobody's ever asked me that, because that would increase your blood pressure a little. 5 to 10 millimeters difference. The most common elevation is due to stress. So, anybody asked you if you've been under stress lately? Hell, I think we've probably all been under stress lately, but no, they don't ask you that sort of thing. What if you're jabbering all the time, talking like I talk, all the time during the taking of the blood pressure? That'll increase your pressure. 10 to 15 millimeters mercury systolic higher. What if you come in from the cold into a nice warm office, but you're freezing? Elevating the blood pressure again. What if you have a full bladder? Oh man, I should have peed before I came into the office. Oh, it hurts. Elevated blood pressure just from that full bladder. What if you cross your legs? Elevates the blood pressure. Usually up to 5 or so millimeters of mercury systolic higher. There are other things that'll decrease it too. Besides having clothing underneath. Have you ever seen people, well, here, you can take it here, let me roll that up. Oh, geez, let me get it tight. Get it way up there. Well, that's compressing the damn blood vessel way up here, above your blood pressure cuff. That's a no-no. That's a no-no. That arm has to be free and right onto the skin. Now, the blood pressure cuff itself, how do you put it on? How do you know they put it on correctly? This side against the limb. Oh, that tells you, okay, this will be up against the limb. And this one tells you, here's where the artery should be. Well, where the hell is the artery? It's towards the inside of the arm. So that should line up right on the inside of the arm with that line. So you get a more accurate reading. All these little subtleties, they are additive too. And so you need to consider all this when you're taking a blood pressure. Also, when you're actually physically taking the blood pressure, you've seen things where all of a sudden they got your blood pressure. Well, no, you have to slowly release that air that you put into the bladder of the cuff, so that you get roughly every second, you should get a drop of that pressure in that bladder, a drop of about 2 to 3 millimeters every second. So it should actually take you probably a good 10 seconds to take that blood pressure. So anybody who gets a blood pressure bang, just like that, I would be suspicious that it's going to be too low. Okay, so those are all of the different things. Now, you see different sizes of cuffs. Notice this one is a small. This is an adolescent. This one here is the average one. And it tells you here the circumference, 26 to 40 centimeter circumference of the arm. Circumference means the whole circle around the arm. This is sort of the average. But there's 7 different sizes. This is a large adult. The large adult, and you can see they sized it right out on here. All the different sizes. You notice how many there are. 7 different sizes, all the way from infant, all the way up to a leg cuff. You have to have the proper size cuff. Well, what if your cuff happens to be too small? Well, if your cuff is too small, you're going to have an artificially elevated or increased blood pressure. If the cuff is too big, you're going to have it a low, artificially low. So you need a proper sized cuff. Okay, so that's the cuff. And I should tell you too that there are many other cuffs available on the market. For example, here is a wrist cuff. So you just have to put that onto the wrist and read it right off of here. The further away from the heart you go, the less reliable these are. And so, I don't usually rely on a wrist cuff at all. Now, there are some people who are morbidly obese. And so the arm, instead of being pretty much symmetrical, starts out really fat up at the top, tapers quickly to the elbow. That makes it difficult to take an accurate blood pressure. Sometimes I have to take the blood pressure on the forearm, which is much more consistent in size. And so, then you wind up taking your blood pressure at the wrist. So you can listen with the bell of the cuff at the wrist and get your pressure there. Okay. I think we've kind of gone over all of the nonsense that we have. What are the good home monitoring cuffs? Well, if you go onto the internet now, they're going to tell you that the best of 2021 or the best of 2022, whatever. But the best of 2022 is called an Oxline pressure, an X-Pro. Oxline, O-X-L-I-N-E. That supposedly is the best. It's not cheap, but it is very accurate. Most of us use an Omron, O-M-R-O-N. And there are several different varieties of Omron that you can go out to the local drugstore and buy. And the Omrons are usually accurate, at least within 5 millimeters of mercury. So it's pretty accurate. So I would, if you're going to get a blood pressure cuff, get the Omron, because that is probably the one that's most available. There's others that are out there as well, like a Welch Allen and all. It's not that bad, almost equivalent to an Omron, but those are the two that you see out in the stores at any rate. Okay, that is blood pressure cuff. All this nonsense is all blood pressure cuff. Let's talk a little bit about pulse. Now, what the heck is a pulse? What is that? It's the heart rate. It's how fast the heart is beating. Okay? Now, what's so important about it? I love to get the pulse myself with my own hands. Why? Why? Well, because I can tell a lot of things by feeling the pulse. We normally will get the pulse at the wrist. Again, why the wrist? Because you're pushing down gently against some solid bone. So it's easier to feel that artery than it would be to try to feel the brachial artery, or to try to feel the carotid artery, or to try to feel it somewhere else in the body. Very accurate if you get it at the wrist level. And remember, you have two arteries at the wrist. One on the thumb side, the radial artery, and the other on the ulnar side of the wrist. We don't know which one is more accurate, because we all differ. It may be that some extremities are radial dominant, and you can feel a pulse very accurately, and some are ulnar dominant. So you feel both. See which one you can feel the best. Now, what do we feel when we feel the pulse? Well, first you feel the oscillation. You feel the oscillation of that artery. So it balloons out when the heart pumps, and when the heart relaxes, it goes down. So you feel those oscillations. The newer types of blood pressure that are taken are done with oscillations. You don't need a stethoscope. You don't need the aneroid sphygmomanometer, which is this thing. What you need, basically, is like you see in the hospitals. They put the cuff on, and they just read it off the chart. And yeah, it blows up the cuff to above systolic, and then takes the readings. It takes the readings, it takes the artery oscillating. That's what it does. And what it gives you is a readout of the mean arterial pressure, both systolic and diastolic. So it's an average. It's calculated in that machine. So it's not like taking a blood pressure with your stethoscope at all. But you don't need anything. You just throw the cuff on and go home, you know. Oh, I should mention too, when you put that cuff on, it needs to be snug. You can't get your fingers more than about an inch under. It needs to be snug, not falling off. Otherwise, you get a false reading again. So, the pulse. What do I feel when I feel that pulse? Is it nice and oscillating, and you can feel it very easily? That's a normal oscillation. Now, let's say you have high blood pressure. You may get a good bounding pulse. It's bounding, you feel it. But boy, that was easy to feel, but it's raising your fingers up too. That's a bounding pulse. You may get a thready pulse. Boy, is it there? Maybe, I don't know. Oh, there it is. Thready pulse. That's when the pressure is low. Now, you can also feel the consistency of the artery. Is it hard? Like it is sometimes with diabetics who get a lot of calcium deposited in the wall of the artery. I can feel that in the artery. That's important to me. But it may not mean anything to someone who's not experienced in doing these. What other types of pulses can we get? You can get the character of the pulse. You can also get whether the pulses are equal on the two sides. Maybe you may not get that bounding pulse on one side, but you will on the other. Maybe that's because there's a little obstruction, narrowing of that artery further up. You can also feel the rhythm. Is it a nice regular rhythm? Or does it occasionally get an extra beat? Does it occasionally drop a beat? Or is it all over the board? No regularity to the beats. That might mean an arrhythmia, like atrial fibrillation. I brought with me the newest thing that's on the market now, which is CardioMobile. This is the CardioMobile app. Well, this isn't the app. This is the CardioMobile machine. There are some downfalls. But what you do is you just put 2 fingers on one hand on one of them, 2 fingers of the other, and then you can read off your smartphone your electrocardiogram. What this does is that it gives you the lead 2 of the normal electrocardiogram that you would get in the office. Now, it seems very simple, and they advertise it like it's simple. And when it comes in the mail, they just say, well, download the app. Well, how do I do that? Yeah, okay. I downloaded the app. And then they say, oh, now you got to synchronize it with your instrument. I said, what the hell? What's that? Okay, I put the call into my kids who know more about all this nonsense. So they had to come over and help me get the darn CardioMobile working because they tried to sell me more stuff to upgrade this CardioMobile machine. Now there's other CardioMobile type home monitoring systems out there. For example, there's a eMay, capital M-A-Y, eMay system. That's a very reasonable system, but it gives you more leeway to take your cardiogram because there are leads. You don't just use your fingers on the leads. You can put them, say, one lead on one arm and one lead on a leg, for example. So you get a different EKG lead. Remember the 12 lead electrocardiogram. There's 12 leads, and they take the heart in different aspects. So that's what the advantage of the eMay system is. There's also Omron makes one as well, and also Wellue, W-E-L-L-U-E. Wellue makes a CardioMobile type of system. But the one that's advertised the most is this system, the CardioMobile system. Okay, I got my wife one because she's had an arrhythmia before, so she needed that. The other thing I have here is Oximeter. Now, the oximeters have been on the market for many years. In fact, they were developed partially over at WPI. And so what does it do? Well, you put your finger in, and there's 2 light sensors in there. 2 light sensors. One is a red light and the other is an ultraviolet light. And so you put your finger in. Those two lights are both different wavelengths. So what you can look at then, eventually, it usually takes a few seconds. The finger has to fit in very well, and you will get a reading. Now the reading will tell you not only the oxygen saturation, but also the pulse rate. The oxygen saturation takes into account the difference between the two types of oxygen in your blood. You see, the blood in the arteries, that has just gone through the lungs, it has full oxygen. Your hemoglobin has every hemoglobin molecule has 4 spaces to trap that oxygen. So if you have full oxygen, the red light that comes through will read. Now, once it goes through all of the little cells, the oxygen gets released to the tissues. Now you have deoxygenated blood. That deoxygenated blood then records from that different wavelength light that comes through. Then they take the ratio of the oxygenated to deoxygenated and convert it to the O2. Okay, that converts it then to the oxygen saturation. So that's a very brief explanation of it. So that is the pulse ox, a very good instrument to have. And now the prices come down considerably, so you can buy it at almost any pharmacy, and it's very inexpensive. You know, $29, $30. You can get a very good one. So I would highly recommend getting a pulse ox. Okay, so we've gone through quite a few things. I don't have time, unfortunately, to talk about the remaining vital signs, like the temperature, etc. But I think that we got through quite a bit with the blood pressure and pulse. And I would hope that you take advantage of some of the new technology that's out there, but only if you really need it. So this is Dr. C. I hope you have a nice day. Stay fit, stay healthy.